Welcome everyone, we're so glad you made the choice to watch our show this evening and joining us for another episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast with your hosts Steve Hodgson and Dr. Eric L. Davis. We ask that you please note that the information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. It is essential to consult with a qualified healthcare professional for any medical concerns, diagnosis, or treatment. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, and any actions taken based on the information presented are at your own risk. We are so glad you made the choice to watch our show this evening and join us for a brand new episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Let's watch what this evening's podcast is all about.
Let's be real. Life can feel overwhelming. Sometimes we lose our direction. And in those moments, reaching out for help isn't weakness. It's strength. You know, one of the most powerful things we can do for our mental health is simply to stop and ask for help. Well, look no further. Let me tell you about Waypost Counseling in Indianapolis, Indiana. Waypost was co-founded by husband and wife team Dr. Eric L. Davis and licensed therapist Aaron Davis. They started Waypost Counseling in 2020 because they wanted to create more than just a therapy practice. They wanted a place that truly walks alongside people through life's hardest seasons. And they offer more than just individual therapy. They provide individual therapy and couples therapy, problem gambling disorder, and consulting services as well. They work with adults navigating everything from ADHD to grief, addiction to life transitions. Every journey is different, but our goal is always the same, to help people pause, reflect, and realign with where they want to go. It's actually where their name, Waypost, comes from. A marker on the path. Something to help guide your next steps. And for anyone listening who's been thinking, I don't know where to start, this might be the moment. Therapy doesn't have to be intimidating. At Waypost, you'll find honesty, warmth, and a practical approach to real change. They're here to help you find direction and walk with you every step of the way. Whether you are in Indiana or anywhere in the United States, help is just a phone call away. They treat clients in person or using video conferencing directly from your home. If you're ready to start that journey, visit waypostcounseling.com or call Dr. Eric L. Davis at 317-762-0904 or therapist Aaron Davis at 317-659-0179 and take the first step. Waypost Counseling is proudly certified by the Indiana FSSA Division of Mental Health and Addiction and the Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Abuse. That's www.waypostcounseling.com. Your next chapter starts here. You need to make that first call.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us for tonight's episode. This is a direct continuation of our discussion from Part 1, which originally aired on September 11th, 2025. We are delving deeper into the profound and tragic events of September 11th, 2001, which unfolded with devastating impact across New York City, Washington, D.C., and a quiet field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. In this second part, we are honored to continue our conversation with our special guest, Ed Kowalsski, whose unique insights provide a crucial perspective on the complexities of that day. To set the stage for the remainder of our interview, I'll now hand things over to your co-host, Steve Hodgson.
Now, before we continue, I want to take a moment and introduce our very special guest. Tonight, we're honored to be joined by Ed Kowalsski. He's a native New Yorker whose life, like so many, has forever changed on September 11, 2001. See, in the months that followed, Ed served as director of the 9/11 Families for a Secure America Foundation, and he worked closely with families who lost loved ones, listening to their stories, advocating for their needs, and helping to sustain a community of remembrance and caring, and making sure the future security of our country was addressed. Now, Ed brings two powerful perspectives to the conversation. The personal lens of a New Yorker who lived through that day, was right in Midtown Manhattan, and the broader view of someone who walked alongside families in the years that followed. His work has been about honoring lives, elevating voices, and supporting people through a long arc of grief and healing. See, I've known Ed since 1972 as a freshman in high school, as we both attended Xavier High School, a Jesuit high school in New York City, with an ROTC program. In fact, Ed even appeared on a couple of the earlier versions of the Your Life Matters show with Jen and Steve that go like way back. Um, with over 20 years of experience helping local employees navigate the complexities and legal absurdities that they often face, Ed has been a passionate advocate for addressing the regulatory burdens that can overwhelm small businesses. He works as a lawyer for this. He's also committed to holding politicians accountable for their actions and policies that impact the local economy and the local communities. Understand he's no stranger to television and radio. He's appeared many times on Fox News, on the Hannity show, in fact, too. He's been the host of Hudson Valley This Morning with Ed Kowalski, where he shone a light on the remarkable individuals making a difference in that community, in the neighborhood. So we ask that you please join me in giving a welcome to a good friend, Ed Kowalski, to the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Well, Ed Kowalski, thank you for being here with us and for all the hard work that you've done. Dr. Davis and I are grateful, especially on some short notice for you coming on here and being with us, because you're still a very busy gentleman, even to this very day.
I am, Steve. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so Ed, as a native New Yorker, what do you remember most about that day? Like, where were you? What did you see? How did it shape your perspective of New York?
Oh boy. Like I said, the thing that I remember the most about 9/11, it was a singularly beautiful day in New York City. It was one of those, the sun was not too hot in the sky that day, as that James Taylor song goes. It was just a beautiful, beautiful morning. And I was dragging myself to work that day because it was just, it was so beautiful. And I can remember remarking just how wonderfully beautiful the day was. Then, of course, I got into the office, and as I said to you earlier, I said, I don't, when somebody came in and said, gee, a plane hit the Trade Center, my first reaction was a Cessna, a small commercial plane. I didn't really understand that it was a commercial jet. And then, of course, when somebody else came in about a half hour later and said a second plane had hit, I still didn't link the dots in terms of what was going on. And I can remember I went to a big conference room where the firm that I was working with had a TV in it, and I was just trying to process what was happening as in real time kind of thing. And then selfishly, my daughter at that point in time, she might have been 11, maybe 10. And I just wanted to make sure I could get a hold of her. And of course, the other thing that I remember from that day is that the phone lines, it was very difficult to get an outside line, because all the circuits were jammed.
Well, everybody was doing the same thing you did.
Right.
As far as contacting
all the circuits were jammed, couldn't get out. And then finally, what ended up happening is I can remember I just wanted to get out of the city. So, I hung around the office till about 1 o'clock or so, tried to process the news. And then I was living up in Westchester County at that time, and I hopped on the Metro North train out of Grand Central. And then the second thing that I remember from that day, Steve, it was singularly quiet. The conductors didn't make any announcements pertaining to station stops. They didn't collect tickets. The train was just on autopilot. And people that were on the train that day just there was no conversation. Everyone was just sort of sitting in stunned silence in terms of what was happening. And then, interestingly enough, the other thing that I remember is that night, the place where I was living, it was in Bronxville, New York. And that's about, I don't know, 18 miles north of the Trade Center in terms of just in lower Westchester County. And I can remember having the screen door to my deck opened. And I can remember smelling what I thought was like an electrical smell. I can remember, I'm like, gosh, something... Steve, I almost flashed back to remembering what it was like when we were kids playing with electrical trains. Right. That sort of that smell, and I can remember I was like, "Wow, is something? Is something burning? Is there a frayed wire in the house?" And it wasn't. And then it took me a while to realize that what I was smelling was coming from the Trade Center. And I was like, oh my God, and then of course I did I called my family. I let everybody know that we were okay. I wanted to make sure that everybody else was okay in the family. Fortunately, everybody was. My dad was a fireman, and he had since retired. But he was on the phone too, trying to be able to just sort of figure things out with the New York City Fire Department. And then, of course, when I just stunned, I was shocked in terms of what happened. I just, and I guess Dr. Davis, I couldn't process it. I was overwhelmed in terms of just trying to comprehend what occurred. And I was that way. I was that way for a long time. And I was probably, like a lot of people, not functioning in terms of just trying to be able to get back to normal. I can remember getting to work, and back then the New York Times, a paper that I don't normally read, but I did read obviously back then. They ran those legacy obituaries, little snippets of everyone who perished, and I can remember being fascinated and being totally immersed in reading those, and then trying to understand what occurred, and just looking at the enormity of the losses, the enormity of what occurred. And then, of course, I ended up saying, I said, well, what can I do? What is it that I can do in terms of being able to try to, make sense of this? And I ended up getting involved in something called the 9/11 Families for a Secure America. It was founded by a gentleman named Peter Gadiel, an attorney. He lost his son, Jamie, who worked at Cantor Fitzgerald. He was a young man. Jamie has never been recovered. And Peter was processing grief by trying to be able to understand how this occurred, why this occurred, what were the things that we could have caught to prevent this. And I got involved with him in terms of being able to just sort of understand the process and understand what was occurring. How did these guys get in? How did these guys overstay their visas? Were they hiding in plain sight? I was stunned to find out that 9 or 10 of these guys who hijacked the planes, they were registered to vote in this country. As crazy as that sounds, through Motor Voter. When they ended up applying for driver's licenses in Florida, they were, do you want to register to vote? And a lot of them did. I was never able to find out, and I did read the 9/11 Commission report cover to cover. It was never publicized whether they registered as Democrats or Republicans or independents, and I was always sort of curious in regards to that, sort of as a way I could process it through sort of like an ironic kind of situation. But I became angry over that. I became angry that these loopholes existed, and I was fortunate insofar that I was very close to Roger Ailes, who founded. He was the chairman of the board of Fox News. Roger and I were friends, and I began sort of a lot of letter writing, and his wife owned a little newspaper up here in the Dutchess County area, and I began writing letters to the editor, and you finally got to meet him, and so on and so forth. And Roger and I struck up a friendship. And ultimately, because of what I was doing, he introduced me to Sean Hannity. I was on the Sean Hannity show talking a little bit about this. And as I said, I sent you a clip of that YouTube video of my questioning Secretary Lehman is still out there, Steve. So I sent that to you.
And it's amazing. I remember watching in Indiana Fox News, because I always watched Fox News. It was my personal channel I watched. And then your face came up.
I know that guy.
I was like, hey, wait a minute. I know Ed.
I went to high school with him.
Yeah, you were on a couple of times.
Yeah, I was. Yeah. Hannity was stunned in regards to that. He didn't understand that. A lot of people didn't understand that. And then, of course, what ended up happening is that began the phase of my life through the 9/11 organization, where I was doing a lot of political lobbying. I was down in Washington, D.C., I was trying to be able to help people process grief and process grief along the lines of trying to be heard, trying to have, our elected officials just hear them. And I can remember being very frustrated. I can remember, trying to go into, Senator Schumer's office, and he wouldn't see us. He wouldn't see people who were 9/11 victims. And I became enraged at that, and in a politically correct sort of way. But I was stunned, and I still am stunned in regards to some of those things that we spoke about are still yet to be almost 24 years, 25 years later, have yet to be fully closed. So that's sort of how I began to channel a lot of that kind of stuff. Ultimately, the organization did sort of fold, um, because it was just, I think a lot of the founders, um, a lot of the people who founded the organization, lost people in the 9/11 event. I didn't. I was fortunate insofar that I didn't. And they're still processing grief. I mean, the other, one of the other board members, Joan, she lost a son who was a fireman. And she would look at me and tell me the only thing they recovered of her son, the only thing they recovered of her son was his heart. And I can't, the enormity of that,
Yeah.
I still can't comprehend that. I can't
I mean,
comprehend that.
it's just I mean, it really is. These tragedies like this are just uncomprehendable. I mean, they really are. And when it comes to grief, we're trying to make sense of something that makes no sense. It's so one of the questions I had for you is what kinds of long-term struggles did the obviously you were close with a lot of the families, and still are, I would imagine. Um, what were some of the long-term struggles that they shared with you, like mentally, emotionally, or even social struggles that maybe people aren't aware of that they
It's a great question, Eric, and I think a lot of them had to come to terms with the grief, and a lot of them had to come to terms with the loneliness that the grief brought, because they were members of a club that no one wanted to join.
yeah,
And I think a lot of times they were struggling with, um, how people were relating to them, which is a big thing. How do you relate to somebody? I think probably, and again, I'm not a psychologist, Eric, like you are, but I think the post traumatic stress aspect of what they went through and are continuing to go through every anniversary, um, every time life moved on. When Joan's former daughter-in-law, sort of remarried and moved and took her grandchildren to Hawaii. Um, that was a tough thing, and that was a very tough thing. And so I think, interestingly enough, the post-traumatic stress, uh, functions, or the things that they had to cope with, really became, they were enormous. They were just enormous. If I've answered your question.
no,
Yeah.
no, thank you for that.
I there are links in the YouTube description for this video of some societies that is still helping people. But I think you're right. What happens now, in the beginning, it was politicized, 9/11 every year. Now it's more like somebody's looking at it for ratings and memorial, but I don't think we really delved into the mental health effects still. We had someone who was originally scheduled to come onto the show, and he didn't want to publicly relive what he's going through. And I understand that, 100%. We weren't trying to force him or anything like that. I thought he'd be good because he was working down on Wall Street when it happened. But even he was saying that a lot of the trauma and stuff really didn't hit him until a month or two or three
Yeah. Well,
afterwards.
or in some cases, years. I mean, the other attorney that I went down to the 9/11 museum with, and again, he and I never, we didn't lose anyone. We didn't lose
Hmm.
anyone, but I had to get out of there. I had to get out of there. I couldn't, I spent a fair portion of the day there. David was spent more time than me, and I told him, I said, Dave, I've got to meet you outside. I've had enough. And there was this one exhibit that I remember walking up to, and it was behind glass, and it was basically a section of the wall of whatever building, whatever, World Trade Center One, World Trade Center Two. It was literally a sandwiched view. It was the actual, it was a section of floors. That I forget whether it was the 92nd floor to the 84th floor, whatever it was. And it was behind glass, and it said, this represents a section of the compressed
Yeah.
tower collapse.
Hmm.
And I remember staring at that, and I'm like, wow, wow. And then, of course, I was fortunate insofar that there was a New York Times columnist named Jim Dwyer, who unfortunately has passed away now. But Jim Dwyer and I went to grammar school together, and he wrote a book about, and I forget the title of it, and I'll look it up before we leave because it's a great book. But the book that he wrote was the story of the World Trade Center event from the frame of reference of inside the towers, as opposed to watching the outside towers. And I had him on my radio show. And that segment is actually still out there, and I was like, Jim, I had to put your book down several times because he described what was going on from the perspective of the people who were inside the buildings. And I was like, it was a hard thing for me to read. It was a hard thing for me to read. And then, of course, over the years, I met so many people whose lives were just tragically cut short. I mean, I remember meeting the fiance of a guy whose fiance was on one of the airlines that crashed in, and they were just ready to begin their lives, getting ready to be married, and she was working at she was one of the, I think, seven or eight buyers from whatever company she was working at. I forget, from Boston, and she lost her life on the train, and he was not he was just able to talk about what that meant to him. And it was like, wow, what do you say? What do you say other than just be there for people? I'm very fond, Steve, of being able to remember our Jesuit training, and being there for others, and I'm very fond of thinking about a ministry of presence. And sometimes over the years, all I've done is listen to these individuals, and listen to them as best as I can. And it's an incomprehensible thing, to your earlier question, Eric, that they've went through, and are continuing to go through. So
It's one of those strange things that that's the first time we experienced something like that in a very long time on American soil. But you would think that even 24 years after it happened, that we would be paying attention to stuff that's going on in the Ukraine and all these other countries. That, this is, in Israel, the Hamas, and Gaza, all those areas. This is what daily life is like for a lot of these people.
right.
And I don't know if, Trump being a New Yorker all those years and stuff, where he was on 9/11, but I sometimes wonder when he's working really hard to stop wars and doesn't want the needless killing of people, if he's not in the back of his head remembering 9/11 and what it did here in this country. As I said,
Yeah.
we only saw a clip one day. Think about, some of those countries that, are getting bombed by Russia or, the Ukraine on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, it's a valid point. And there's been a lot of talk over the years of, should we as a country have a September 12th mentality? The other, and you raise a very interesting point, because for many years I would go down to the Trade Center for the memorials, and I can remember after about the fifth, maybe it was the 10th anniversary or the 11th anniversary, I can remember being somewhat stunned that it almost felt like it was a party. Um, Bars were open, people were doing bars, and I'm not. Listen, there were people there who were there to remember. There were people there who were there to be engaged in the reading of the names and so on and so forth. But I got to tell you something, Steve. There were a lot of people looking to just bar hop, and I remember being annoyed at that. I remember being able to say, is this what this now becomes? Is this now just sort of a chance to just be able to it wasn't reverent. It wasn't reverent enough for me, and it's just not that I wanted people to be maudlin, but there were people. There was a little bit of a San Gennaro feast perspective to it, Steve, that I was like really taken aback by.
I think just in general, every holiday that we have, like Memorial Day or Veterans Day, I don't think people really pay attention anymore what that holiday is all about. It's more like, hey, another day off, let's have friends over and have a barbecue.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
that's really what it's become.
By the way, for Jim Dwyer's book is called 102 Minutes: The Untold Story of the Fight to Survive Inside the Twin Towers. Um, a phenomenal read. And Steve, I actually have a copy of my interview with Jim prior to him passing. I'll send that to you so you have it.
Okay. And there'll be a link for the book in the description also. I'll make sure I include that.
But the other issue too to consider, Eric, is that like they're right now. I'm sort of arrived at a point in time where a lot of the clients that I support from a labor relations and legal perspective, that's what I do. I'm amazed in regards to how many generations now are in the same workplace, going all the way from the boomers that Steve and I are. Although I think there's a new designation right now. I heard somebody say that folks born instead of being considered a boomer, Steve and I would be considered a Generation Jones person insofar that we're born from 54 on, if you will.
I don't know. I sort of heard, just the word old is used a lot.
Well, old is there. Old is there. Older than dirt is another way of explaining it. But my point is, I've got a point here, fellows, so stick with me. My point is that there are so many. I'm amazed insofar that there are people now that I deal with professionally who don't remember life before September 11th. They don't. September 11th to them is almost ancient history, in terms of what's gone on. And that to me is amazing. And I'm not quite certain that they fully understand what happened and why it happened and what we need to be able to do to prevent it from happening. Steve, our former classmate, John Antisev, the FBI guy, he when I asked John the last time I saw him, John was involved in the first World Trade Center bombing. And I told him, I said, John, and he was very much involved in handling the individual who was arrested, and I think who became paramount in terms of being able to, provide information to the FBI that ultimately, I think, led to Osama bin Laden being targeted. If I'm not mistaken, I think this guy gave John Osama bin Laden's cell phone number, which I think is now, for the record, as crazy as it sounds. Ultimately, to make a long story short, I can remember John saying, Ed, having John got very close to this guy, and John said to me, he goes, Ed, this is not going to be over in our lifetime. That's what he said to me.
And I really don't think it's ever going to be over, but I don't know, just the perception our generation that's around today sort of hasn't learned from history. And history has to keep repeating itself for no reason whatsoever. Instead of going back and learning from history, we keep trying to go back and change history, and you can't change what happened.
No, and as I said, I mean, I know the focus of what we're talking about today is on the mental health aspects of this, and it's a very, very, very important topic to keep in mind. And I don't know what the answer is on that. I don't know what the answer I don't know if you suffer an event like this in your family or with people you know. I don't know if I don't know if you're ever over it. I don't know. And I think the best people can do is to try to cope with that grief. And sometimes that coping with that grief, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they do it.
But has anyone that's lived in New York, like you and I both grew up in New York, have we ever really forgotten? Years later, I mean, those of us that were alive and were like little kids, but were aware of what was happening that day and aware of the loss. I don't think we've ever forgotten. I know for me, I just pushed it back a little bit. It's probably where my hair went, but I pushed it back a little bit, and I've never forgotten it. And I remember watching the videos that we're going to show during the show today too. Um, and it brought back that same emotion, that same feeling all over again. It was like emptiness, like what, there's nothing we can do but just sit and process it and try to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Well, then the other issue too, Steve, over the years, when the legal settlements were being worked out, right? And you ended up having, which is, I don't know how this was done, but I mean, when you ended up having, there was a formulaic payout based upon, what people's worth were. I mean, how do you do that? Which is why sometimes I hate lawyers. I mean, I mean, how do you end up putting, why is Steve's life worth this and Eric's life is worth that? How do you do that? How do you do that with any kind of objectivity? And how do you do that in terms of being able to communicate that to people? So a lot of the victims, a lot of the individuals that went through that process were in effect re-traumatized by that, in terms of, well, what do you mean my son who never went to college, his life was worth less than somebody who's a Cantor Fitzgerald day trader? I don't, that's a tough thing. And that occurred. That actually occurred.
Oh, I know it occurred. Yes, it definitely occurred. Tell us a little bit about radio and now even podcasting. We were talking a little bit before we went on the air when you were doing Hudson Valley this morning with Ed Kowalski.
Yep, that's me.
And you're also looking into now, you were doing a podcast for a while, and now you're going to extend that further to another podcast and maybe even more radio.
Yeah, I'm doing a little bit of podcasting. I'm talking to another radio station up here, a little bit of a stronger signal than WKIP did, and we're talking about being able to do that. And again, the focus of what I try to be able to do is just do what we're doing here, to be able to talk. And again, the focus of how I began doing this was talking to our listeners about the regulatory burden that is placed on small business and all small businesses and employers in New York State, and if I were to tell you that, if you were to add it up, and I would say this to people, if you were to add up on any one day, if you're a new business owner, or if you're a new person or if you're a person who wants to open a business in New York State, believe it or not, if you add it all up, depending upon your business, depending upon what you do, depending upon the size of the employees, the size of your business, you'd have to be in compliance with almost 30,000 federal, state, or local regulations. You got to think that through. That to me is incredible. So what I try to be able to do is point that out. I like being able to point out the absurdity of that. I like being able to use the voice that I was so gifted to have, and I'm talking about the platform, not my voice,
Right.
I'm talking about the platform, to be able to point that out and be able to hold people accountable. I like being able, Steve, to hold people accountable to what's going on. I also like being able to help people engage in. I try to focus on a lot of the good about what goes on. There's a lot of good people in the world. Like, what Mr. Rogers used to say: when tragedy occurs, right? Look for the helpers. The helpers are going to be the ones going to show you how to deal with this stuff. And that's what I try to be able to do. I try to be able to bring a community focus to what we're talking about on air, and I try to have a lot of fun with it. I like being able to hold politicians' feet to the fire sometimes in terms of what they're doing and why they're doing it. So, yeah, so that's what I do, Steve.
Well, if you remember in New York, and then I'm going to let Dr. Davis ask his last question here. If you remember in New York, when that happened, the number of people that lined up outside of hospitals to donate blood and to
Yeah.
help. Anyway, and people always stuck in my mind because people used to say, New Yorkers, they're arrogant people and, they care about themselves. It's like, I always point back to that day and said, just look at New Yorkers because in a moment, they all came together.
Well,
Didn't
it's
make a
funny. It's
difference.
funny. I'm just getting a flashback of looking out there was a blood bank in the Citibank building where I was working. And within maybe a half hour of the event occurring, it was triple lines around the block to be able to
Mhm.
donate, you know, so yeah, there are, if there's anything that's been positive from this, and this is is a strong statement for me to make, it was seeing those kinds of things. It was seeing people helping each other. It was seeing people just being there for each other. As I said earlier, engaging in that ministry of presence to be able to just say, listen, let's talk. Let's figure it out. And like I said, that's what I tried to do for all the years I was associated with that organization.
Here's one last question for you. How do you see the legacy of 9/11 shaping future generations? You kind of talked about that earlier. Like a lot of folks weren't even born yet, and especially those who weren't alive at the time.
And Eric, that's a great question. And I guess I'm sort of um, sometimes taken aback when I'm talking to a younger person. Like, for example, one of the producer on the show that I'm going to be doing on Thursday and Friday, as well as on the weekends, is a young man, got a lot of talent, very, very, very smart. Um, but he was born in I think in 2012, right? He was born in 2012. And I think when you talk to him about these issues, I don't think he considers, well, why did this happen? How did this happen? What do we need to do to make sure it doesn't happen again? I don't think he thinks that. I think he looks at it from the perspective of, yeah, it happened, and it was really bad. But I don't think he looks at being able to be anything beyond the actual event, if that makes sense.
That totally does.
And I think that's the thing that I try to work with him on, to be able to say, well, yeah, but are you aware that 10 of these guys were registered to vote in this country? Does that make you angry? What are you going to do about that? Are you going to be able to point that out? Are you going to be able to just, in effect, point that out to people, and just hold people accountable for that? I think that I think is the big difference, Eric, that I see. Um, Look, we could do another segment in regards to whether or not people of that generation are being educated properly. Are we doing that? Are we giving them the tools that they need to understand Roger Ailes used to tell me when I would ask him, Roger, you've got more money than God. Why do you do what you do? And he looked at me one night and he says, you know what, Ed? I do it because I want to be able to make sure people understand what their responsibilities are as Americans. And that comment stuck with me because I was like, wow, that does make sense. And
Mhm.
over the years, Steve, because I've had the ability of being able to have the radio show, I can remember talking to people like Richard Dreyfuss, the actor, who was a very Frank Zappa, who are very big components of civics education. As crazy as that sounds, they're big components of civics education to make sure people understand how things work and how they should work. So that's sort of, I think, and if I've answered your question, Eric, those are the things that I think are that keep me going, that keep me being able to just use this as topics to be able to talk about this. And I think it's important.
I
Well, to
agree.
our
Thank you so much.
audience, I mean, I've known Ed for many years. We come from a strong community of students at Xavier High School in New York City, where it was the norm to keep helping our brothers and graduates, because we actually do that even today. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell you, when I was diagnosed with, originally was IPF, before we found out what I really had, I remember Ed reaching out to me. Okay. And the first thing he told me, and we had spoken throughout the years, he's been on the Your Life Matters show with Jen and Steve a couple of different times, but he reached out and said, if there's something you need, he said, the graduates will all be here in a moment to help you, whatever you need. And I remember because that touched me,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we had such, and still do have such, a strong bond with our fellow students. I mean, come on, we're going to celebrate our 50th anniversary.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, think about that in high school. That's 50th anniversary. So I said we're in that old generation. I don't care what they call it now. We're up there on that. So just know that talking about the events of 9/11 this evening helps others who may also be changed to feel safe to talk about it, even with their loved ones, and help the support they want and need and are definitely entitled to.
And Steve,
So,
let me just lay this one last point out too.
mhm.
It's okay. I think a lot of times when we're dealing with people who are dealing with post traumatic stress on any levels, whether it be a veteran, I get incensed in terms of some of the things that we've done to our veterans who are suffering from this, and we're not helping them. I get angry at that. But I think it's important to be able to just, and Eric, this is really more your wheelhouse than mine. You need to be able to let these individuals who are going through these events and reliving these memories and who can't move forward because of their memories, you just need to listen to talk. You need to let them talk.
Yeah.
And I think there is a tremendous benefit in terms of being able to share post traumatic stress stories with each other, because that's the only way that people are going to really be able to get to overcome these events. And like I said, the psychology of grief, the psychology of trauma. Um, it's a fascinating topic, and it's a topic that I think forever changes people. And people can be paralyzed by it for the rest of their lives, or people can choose to be able to say, "This occurred, and this is what I want to do to try to be able to get better, and this is what I want to try to be able to do to help other people get through this." So that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah.
And if people
And
want
I think
back up to that story too, they could go look at that PTSD episode we did when
Right,
Dave was a law enforcement officer
right.
and he was on a SWAT team. And Dave went into detail of, suffering from PTSD and how they treated him in the department afterwards.
Guys, I'm going to have to hop. I'm sorry,
Okay.
but
Yep.
thank you very
No
much for
problem.
your time.
Thank
We
you
want
so
to
much,
thank you
Ed. We
for,
appreciate you.
yeah, we
You
thank you
betcha,
for your
guys.
courage, your voice, your friendship,
Yeah.
and we always honor that and we hold you in respect.
Thanks for
Thanks,
being
Ed.
you and for all you do, Ed.
Thanks, Eric.
Seriously,
Thank
I
you,
mean
Steve.
that.
Bye, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
So again, I just want to say how grateful we are that Ed Kowalski chose to sit with us and share his story today. It gives us deeper insight into how the families were feeling after the disaster. We can only imagine what they went through, but can never fully understand.
What he shared is a powerful reminder that trauma doesn't always show itself right away, and healing doesn't follow a timeline. His honesty and insight will help others realize they're not alone, and that their feelings, even years later, are real and valid.
Now, we're going to continue the conversation in a moment, but I want to pause here and reflect on the resilience of everyday people like Ed and the 9/11 families, even the first responders whose lives were touched by September 11th.
Of the World Trade Center. Just received word that a plane apparently has crashed into the tower.
Something relatively devastating happening this morning there.
There is more and more fire and smoke.
Another plane has hit Tower 2.
Horrific scene here. There's debris flying through the directly in the middle of one of the World Trade Center towers.
Both towers of the World Trade Center have been hit.
We looked up and there was a plane. Next thing you know, we heard boom. We ran up to the corner and hit right into the World Trade Center.
Something that has happened here at the World Trade Center. We noticed flame and an awful lot of smoke from one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
There has been some sort of explosion. We don't fully know the details. There is one report, as of yet unconfirmed, that a plane has hit the World Trade Center.
Uncertainty right now as to what is happening. You can see there are choppers. I believe that could be a police helicopter that is. Oh, wow. We just saw, my goodness. Another live picture right now. Oh, my goodness. Of what I believe was a plane that just hit another plane.
Does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
That looks like a second plane has
I
just
did
hit.
not see a plane go in. That just exploded.
We just saw another plane coming in from the side.
Each of us will remember what happened that day and to whom it happened. We'll remember the moment the news came, where we were, and what we were doing. Some will remember an image of a fire or a story of rescue. Some will carry memories of a face and a voice gone forever.
We've talked about 9/11 throughout the show. I think it was a good time now to show that video because I think people need to remember what we're talking about. Now, I can't take credit for the video. I did not make the video. I found it on YouTube. The information, credits go to the person that's in the description. So, but I don't have any words for when I look back at that. There's nothing that I've seen in my lifetime that compares to that. I mean, we see stuff, wars we talked about earlier, like in the Ukraine and stuff, and I don't know. It's different when you know it's your own country, your own town, your own people that are dying in that. And all I can say is our hearts truly go out to everyone who had suffered needlessly through wars or acts of terrorism here or anywhere in the world. I mean, innocent people, shouldn't lose their lives over that. Now, Dr. Davis, we heard the human side of the tragedy firsthand from Ed, but there were many brave men and women, first responders, who stepped up and ran inside the towers. They climbed thousands of steps trying to help people, who were jumping to their deaths and became victims themselves. It's actually interesting, even during that video, I noticed when the towers were falling, they showed people starting to run away, and you see the police officers turn around and start to run, but they only ran about 2 or 3 feet and then turned around and stopped because their job was to help people. So it's absolutely incredible. Now, 24 years later, many first responders are still living with the physical and psychological wounds from 9/11. Now, from your perspective as a psychotherapist, what kind of mental health struggles are most common amongst those people that they're suffering today?
Definitely, there would be high rates of post-traumatic stress without a doubt. I mean, I think that, the fact that anyone that was an adult or old enough to remember when that happened, like it was a profound enough event. We all remember exactly where. I mean, it's along the lines of like JFK or nationwide tragedies or worldwide tragedies. I think that I've also heard a lot of instances where individuals will talk about experiencing like survivor's guilt, but it's heartbreaking. That breaks my heart, man, just seeing that stuff.
Let's talk about survivor's guilt a little bit. I know researching the show, I saw a firefighter who was there but had, luckily was not in the building, was outside when the building started to rumble and they got out of the way. But yet the rest of their company was inside the building, in the lobby, because that was like their central command was in the lobby. How does someone deal with that survivor's guilt? That's pretty intense.
I mean, I think it's something that takes a while. I mean, with survivor's guilt, it's not really guilt because we haven't done anything wrong. You know what I mean? So it's like the person hasn't done anything wrong. And then it's the question of, coulda, woulda, shoulda, what if this was different? I mean, those are all dangerous places in our head because we can't change anything at that point. If I'm thinking to the past and thinking, well, I if only this, or I'm just spinning my wheels. I think that the answer to the question is um, in the best way they can. How does somebody deal with that best way they can? I mean, um, I can tell you as a therapist that people grieve in different ways. You know, an example that I give clients a lot of times is I'll just say, if you've ever been at a funeral, you know, and most of us have, it's like, you know, look around because there will be some family members of the deceased who, they're cutting up in the corner and like, telling jokes and trying to laugh, and that's how they're grieving. Maybe they're telling stories about the person, or someone else, maybe just laying on the ground crying. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. I think what's most important is that we do grieve.
And that's why a lot of people have, instead of in loving remembrance, it's a celebration of life.
Yeah.
I know myself, I don't want people, crying and stuff over it. Celebrate my life. Knock on wood here, well, press board, but I've had a good life so far, and celebrate the life, don't feel. That I'm gone. But that like brings me to my next question. All the stuff that's done around these anniversaries. I mean, to certain family members, like someone who lost their spouse, or a child who was daddy's girl that lost a daddy, during that. This has to re-traumatize them over and over and over again, every single year. We talked about earlier about, people putting up, the date someone died, my mom died on this day. We talked about that. But, you know, I don't even put up the birthday every year because that's re-traumatizing myself. Yeah, the person's gone. It's not that I've forgotten them and stuff,
Yeah.
but I don't need to keep throwing it out there, year after year after year. Do you think that that's really hurting some of the survivors by doing that or helping them?
I think it probably depends on the person, where on one hand, like I'm sure that there's a little, maybe a little bit of peace of mind that someone can get knowing that, hey, that no one has forgotten what happened. You know, they've they're making it a point to acknowledge, um, at the same time, I mean, I see the other side of the coin where, and I think for family members or for loved ones, what's most important is that they do what's right for them. If they're in a place where to go to an event would only make it worse or more difficult, then by all means don't. Like you don't have to, and it doesn't mean that you're grieving any less than anybody else, or that you're not doing it. Or there. I wish people understood that there is no right or wrong way to grieve. There just isn't.
But how do you know if that grief is something you should seek help? I know there's a thing called prolonged grief disorder
Mhm.
that people can suffer. So, what is prolonged grief disorder? And again, how do we know if our grieving has reached the point where we probably should seek help for it?
So prolonged grieving disorder is where a person, take what a and it's kind of relative because grief, there's no defined like grief lasts exactly this long. It depends on the person, it depends on the situation. But it's basically where a person is not, they'll get stuck in that grieving process, and they just for a long time they don't feel like they're moving forward at all. You know, what I always tell my clients who are struggling with grief is that when it comes to grief, I'm a firm believer that the absolute best that we can hope for is melancholy. Okay, so like a beautiful sadness, and I was talking about my dad Ron, who passed away in the year 2000. So it's been a long time ago. You know, Have I grieved him? Oh, absolutely. Do I still grieve him? Absolutely. It just depends on what day it is. And, I'm never, my feelings are never going to go back to exactly how I felt, before he passed away. So acknowledging that I'm going to be hurt, there's going to be a level of hurt. Um, but looking at, honoring their memory and remembering the good things and celebrating them. Like you said, that's really hard to do when we're in the midst of grieving. And my heart breaks for individuals because and grief also comes in waves. There's no defined formula for it or anything. Like, there's stages of grief and all that, but they don't necessarily happen in any particular order. So it's grief is very touch and go.
So what do you do? Like if we know someone that lost someone in 9/11 and is dealing with these anniversary things, or even someone lost someone, in some kind of tragedy, all of a sudden, was standing on the sidewalk, got hit by a vehicle and was killed. I mean, these things happen. What's a compassionate way to show support without reopening the wounds that the people are suffering?
I think a lot of times, simply just asking if a person's doing okay, just letting them know that you're there. You don't even have to, it's kind of the unspoken thing. Like we both know what day it is or, whatever, but just, checking in with somebody, just, hey, just seeing how you're doing. You doing okay? Is there anything I can do for you? And that puts the ball in that person's court. If they want to bring up what it is, then they can. If they don't want to, they don't have to. So it puts the ball in their court.
I mean, I've been in situations where, what do I sometimes don't know what to say to somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're at the funeral, it's like, so sorry, blah, blah, blah. But, if I see someone a year later that maybe I hadn't seen since then, I don't want to go back and open up that can of worms for them all over again.
Yeah.
So, I somehow or other in the conversation will throw in, really sorry about what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard about it, really sorry, and try to zoom right past it. So not to, to at least acknowledge that I'm not being cold and I didn't even mention it, but they're not harping on it and I don't want to harp on it. I just want to give my condolences. So there's 3 questions I want to ask, and then we can wrap up this really special episode. Okay, what should someone do if they recognize that they're still struggling emotionally from 9/11, or for that matter, any major traumatic event?
Seek help. And, the thing I always say, if you can, start with family. If you're close with a family member, tell someone what's going on with you. Open up to someone. We have a saying in the helping professions. We say we're only as sick as our deepest secret. And I think there's some truth to that. Where, if I have people in my corner that I can talk to about, what's going on, and I know that they're coming from a place of love, no matter what, they're not going to judge me. I mean, I'm sitting here talking to you, and it's like, I'm looking at somebody I could call, honestly, and that's a compliment to you, Steve. Like,
I appreciate
if I could reach out to Steve. Steve's not going to judge me, Steve. So reach out to a friend, and if you're really, really struggling, don't hesitate to reach out to a professional. We're not here to judge you. We're not here to exploit. I mean, seriously, we are here to help you.
I mean, we had the guest that we were originally supposed to have on tonight, but I understand their reluctance
Absolutely.
to even discuss those things, and it's, I still think a lot of it is the stigma of needing mental health, but yet we need to, if we can get past that doorway and walk into the room, they'll deal with stuff much better. And I've seen people that don't want to talk about things, but after they've sought help, I almost said seeked, after they sought help and got professional help, they were more than willing to talk about things
Yeah.
because they realized that, hey, this worked for me. I can help others with it.
Yeah.
So what I can say to anyone, just myself that's out there struggling, go take that first step.
Absolutely.
Those days
Yeah.
of mental health, being that there's something like really, really wrong with you and crazy are gone. That left
Yeah.
luckily a number of years ago. So what role does therapy and counseling play and what kind of approaches? And there's a couple of things I'm going to have you explain, like CBT, EMOR, and DBT.
Okay, so all right, so with the let me
CBT is
answer
the
those
first
first.
one.
So
Yeah.
CBT stands for cognitive behavioral therapy, and it literally is what it means. It's our cognition, so our thinking, our behavior, and basically what we do in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is probably the most common type of therapy that it's kind of the go-to, I would say. And other things build upon that. But we talk about the the inner talk, the thinking that takes place, and then formulate plans on not only to understand the thinking, but what do we do with that thinking? Do I can I change that thinking, or do I just have to live with it and behave differently? Or then let's see, you said EMDR.
EMDR, yes.
Okay, so that's eye movement desensitization reintegration. And EMDR basically, I'm trying to think how to explain it. My wife is actually, Erin's actually trained in it. I'm not. But basically, it has to do with rapid eye movement. So, like when we sleep, and we see where our eyes go back and forth like that, it's like rapid eye movement. They've basically found that in therapy, when the therapist triggers that, so they'll do a thing where they get your eyes moving, and they basically, research has shown that you can get a lot more done, with that. But definitely anyone who's out there interested in learning more, check it out. There's a ton of information on EMDR, but I know just enough to probably tell you wrong. So I'm gonna leave it at that on that one. What was the other one that you mentioned?
DBT.
Oh,
DBT.
DBT.
Yeah.
So DBT stands for dialectical behavioral therapy. And it's kind of like CBT, but really it's about, our self-talk and our dialect. So basically, um, you know, how do we tell ourselves certain things? And what I'm talking about, like some common themes are things such as catastrophic thinking. I think everybody's guilty of that at one point or another. This always happens to me. The truth is, no, it doesn't. I mean, I think every single day that we got, I forget everything. It's like, no, I don't. I know what my name is. I mean, I'm teasing, but you know what I mean? Um, a lot of times we beat ourselves up in our own head, and we are our own worst critic. And therapy's role in any of these things is really to help a person get to where they want to be, in spite of whatever it is that they're dealing with. If it's grief and loss, we're going to work on the grief and loss. We're going to equip you with the tools to, our goal is for you to not need us anymore eventually. That really is, if there's a therapist, it's like, just keep coming to me forever, run. Because they're not looking to help you. My goal is for none of my clients to ever need me again.
Right.
But if they do need me again, I'm still here. Like, they're welcome to come back.
So, last question I'll ask: if we know someone that's suffering, let's put it that way. What's the best way not only to support them, but I mean, we have to be there supportive for them, but how do we get them to understand that maybe it's time to go seek help?
That's a really tough spot to be in. Okay. I think what's most important, so you're saying from the perspective of a family member, and it's like, yeah, they need to get some help. We've been
Right,
talking about
exactly.
this. I think that anytime you are confronting, someone, one thing you can do to help with defensiveness, and anyone can use this skill, it's not magic, is just I statements. So instead of, you need to get some help, That's one way of saying it. But another way of saying the same exact thing in a very loving, non-confrontational, very assertive, kind, much kinder way is, I'm really concerned about you. We've, I know we've talked a lot about maybe you getting some help, and I want you to know I'm really concerned, and I'd really like you to think about getting some help. Is there anything I could do to help? Something like that. Sometimes people aren't ready to get help, and
I was
that's
just going to say, because
unfortunate.
a lot of times people will just say to that, yeah, I don't need help.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know,
And I mean, the reality is it is really hard to help somebody that doesn't want help,
right. I
you
mean,
know?
they always say the first step is to say, I have a problem.
Yeah.
Is to admit that I have a problem.
Yeah.
And, that's a big jump forward,
It is.
because if not, they're going to fight you tooth and nail throughout the
Yeah.
entire time.
And here's something else. So if a family member is, let's say they have a family member who's unbelievably depressed, they've talked to them, they've tried to get them to get some help, go to therapy, whatever, and the person is just not making any effort. Unfortunately, sometimes things get to a point where the best thing that that family member, that loved one can do is make sure that they take care of themselves, and kind of like, um, and saying like, I'm here for you and I love you and I'm here to support you, but like I can only do my part of this. I can't do yours,
Right.
and that's okay. It's okay to do that sometimes.
Well, as we close today's show, we want to return to the promise that was made 24 years ago. Never forget, but a little different. We want you to never forget the people, never forget the stories, definitely never forget the cost, and never forget the care for those that are still paying for it. There's still many people that are still grieving and having problems from that. First responders, probably especially, or anyone that was in the buildings and even downtown during that time. I can see that happening. So if today stirred up any memories, tightness in your chest, a lump in your throat, a wave of sadness, take a slow breath with us. Breathe in 1, 2, 3, and breathe out 1, 2, 3. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the chair beneath you. You're here. And remember, you're not alone.
Healing is communal. It happens in clinics and kitchen tables, at memorials, and in quiet walks around the block. It happens when we check on a neighbor, share a story, or finally make that first therapy appointment. If you're noticing persistent symptoms, nightmares, avoidance, irritability, or trouble sleeping, guilt that won't let go, please reach out. Start with your primary care provider, a licensed therapist, or a trusted faith or community leader. If you're a responder or survivor from that day, programs exist specifically for you. Seek them out and claim the care that you've earned.
We also invite you to practice 3 small acts this week in honor of the lives from 9/11 that we're remembering. Reach out, call somebody who might be hurting. That's the first one. Number 2, it's like a ritual. Light a candle. If you're a Christian or religious, say a prayer. Visit a local memorial. Ed talked about the 9/11 memorial in New York. Go down and visit that. Reset.
Which is really a beautiful. I mean, honestly, it's a beautiful place. I mean,
Yeah, I've been there myself
it,
too. So,
yeah, what an amazing place. And for anybody listening, if you maybe you don't know a lot about 9/11 and would like to learn more about, like we were talking about, what actually happened, and that is a wonderful place to go and learn all about it.
yes, and you actually see stuff from, you know, the buildings that were there, the World
Mhm.
Trade Center and stuff. So, and remember to reset. Give yourself one genuine hour of rest. No news, no doom scrolling, just breathe, movement, or prayer. We've talked about that on a couple of shows where, just turn the news off.
Yeah.
Really just there's life going on around you. Don't let them set the tone for your life.
Yeah.
Set your own tone and see life.
Another thing we can do is keep important numbers nearby. 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Hotline. Veterans can press 1 after calling for specialized support. Responders can ask for dedicated resources. You matter, your story matters, and help is available.
Now, to all the families who have lost loved ones, to the responders who still carry the smoke in their lungs and memories, to everyone who felt the ground shift that day, your courage continues to shape us. We honor you not only with words, but with the daily work of caring for one another. Now, as I always say, take a moment to hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment, maybe even a message for Ed. I'm sure he would love to see it. You can also visit our website at yourlifematterspodcast.com for more information about the show, contact, and so much more. So from all of us here, thank you for spending the time with us. May your night be peaceful, your memories held with gentleness, and your steps tomorrow be steady. Remember, we heal, we move forward together, and always remember that your life matters. So God bless you, and we hope to see you again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this week's new episode of the Your Life Matters Show podcast. Please be sure to join us again next week for another great episode with your host Steve Hodgson and psychotherapist Dr. Eric L. Davis. Please remember to subscribe to our channel if you have not already done so, and hit the like button if you enjoyed this episode. Your help with this helps us reach a wider audience that may need our help. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you are valuable and important. Take time to cherish yourself and those around you. Never forget, your life matters.